Alright, welcome to the mapping tutorial. We are going to get started today talking about why Tableau is not actually the best software to use for mapping. So Tableau, like with many things, is not GIS software. It's not meant to do any kind of spatial analysis. It's really meant just to display the results of spatial analysis that you do elsewhere. So that said, it's really useful for very easily displaying information. So what that ultimately means is that you need to treat your spatial data like joined, tabular data. So it needs to act more like a database than like a spatial file. What I mean by that is when you download spatial files, they kind of come in this packet together with a lot of information about them. If you're going to use spatial data in Tableau, you want to use something that it can be joined on. So what I mean when I say that is that you might want to use something like zip code or city or census tract or things like that. Even though zip code is not technically a spatial, not technically a geographic boundary, zip codes still work as a good proxy. And a lot of data is distributed in zip codes. So for our purposes today, we're going to use zip codes. And I'll show you at the end of the tutorial how to use neighborhood tabulation areas. The issue with neighborhood tabulation areas is that if your data didn't come down as in NTAs or neighborhood tabulation areas, then it's going to be exceedingly challenging to use it in that format. So let's go ahead and get started and look at some of this data structure. So what we have here is demographic statistics by zip code. This actually came in as jurisdiction name, but we knew that jurisdiction name was going to be our unique key. So you have this demographic statistics by zip code, and the link of where I got it is in the notes. And this jurisdiction name is our unique key, but it's also our geographic area. So we had to make a copy of it because you can't use something both as a unique key and as a geographic area because the data types won't work, which makes sense. You don't necessarily want to join on geographic areas unless you're in a GIS software such as QGIS. All right, so we took jurisdiction name and then we went over here and we created a calculation that was just the exact same as jurisdiction name. I just translated it into a string rather than a number. I could have had it say just jurisdiction name here completely, and that's how you duplicate a column. So we changed this to have a geographic role, and its geographic role is zip code. Okay. And then all of this information came in, and then we also wanted to pull in the median rental price for studios, 1 bedrooms, and 2 bedrooms from Zillow. So we have this CSV file. Just like normal, we just pull it over here. You will have to tell it what to join on. So you have to tell it to join on jurisdiction name, which you can just search for, and region name. And region name is our zip code here. We're not going to use region name as any sort of geographic information since we already have this geographic zip code. That's why we didn't need to change the data type. Okay. Great. So once you've joined your fields, we need to do one more step. So this might look slightly different because I forgot this in the original video. Okay, scroll all the way over and to the right, and you're going to see a bunch of dates in the headers, right? So this zip median rental price studio has dates in the headers. That is an absolute no-no for us. We really need to get those dates into the data somehow. We want to make it long and skinny, not super wide. Data in the headers, not going to work. All right, so click on the first one, which should be 2010 something, and then shift click over here on the last one, which should be 2019-04, and then right click and select pivot. Okay, it'll think for just a minute. And then we're going to rename the pivot field names. We're going to call this date. And we're going to call the pivot field values median rent. All right. And once you've done this, you can go ahead and move on to working with this data. We're going to go over and look at our first map and how to use this data spatially. All right, enjoy. So the first thing that we're going to do is look at just the household income of New York City. And this actually doesn't use our data at all. So this is something that comes pre-packaged with Tableau, which might be one of the most useful things. So we have this all the way up at the top, which I don't know if you actually can see it. If you go and click on map, and then you click on map layers, you get all of these map layers that come from the census. Which is really, really fantastic. That's the other thing I wanted. And what you see here is just the raw map layers that you get from Tableau. So I went up here, I went to map, I went to map layers, and then I got these options. So I only care about New York. I don't care about anywhere that's not New York. So I'm going to say that I want US metro boundaries, county borders, and then here on my layer, I'm going to say that I want household income median. You can only put one of these layers on at a time, but it gives you a good sense of the median income throughout New York City. Now, I've selected that I want the county borders, which also happen to be the borough borders. It's currently using this like very light map. You can also use the dark map, which, you know, I'm a big fan of the dark map. But then you have to like change your colors, and it's going to take mine a second to load. There we go. So you can play around with your background colors, with the information that's displayed here, and just use, like, if all that you want is a population map, say you just want a population map of Brooklyn, then this is what you want to do. The way that I'm zooming in here is I am double clicking. There's no drag feature necessarily. Okay. If you just want a like income map of Brooklyn, just use the stuff that already comes prepackaged. All right, but usually you want to use your own data, just like we do. Oh, wait, really quick. The way that I even got here was I double clicked on zip code. So just double click, like literally double click on zip code, and latitude and longitude are going to fill for, like automatically fill for you. All right, so we're going to move on to this rent map. The rent map is probably the most complicated thing that we're going to make, and it is not necessarily the most informative. All right, so the way that you make this is, again, double click on zip code, and then you'll automatically get a latitude and a longitude up here in the columns. Now, the key to doing this is to command click on the longitude and drag it next to this longitude. And then that will give you two maps. I just made 3, but that will give you 2. When you have the 2 maps next to each other, come over here and you'll see that your marks card has 3 levels on it now. It has the all, it has the longitude, and it has this longitude. So go ahead and on the first longitude, drag the count of people receiving public assistance. So count public assistance total, drag that over here to color. And what that's going to do is that's going to fill in the number of people total who are receiving public assistance in that zip code. It would possibly be conceptually better to use a normalized version of this, so using a percentage. But because what we're trying to visualize throughout this set of visualizations is an understanding of apartment availability and apartment cost, this raw number of people actually works pretty well for our purposes. All right, so you drag the sum of count, and we're looking for areas that have very high numbers of people receiving public assistance. And we can see that pretty easily there. Okay, so it automatically fills in the shading for you, something like this. You may notice that we are missing a few zip codes, like this one here in Richmond County, Staten Island. That is coming from the Zillow database data structure. That is not a complete data set. So if it didn't exist in the Zillow data set, it didn't exist anywhere. All right. The next thing that you're going to do is come down here to the bottom longitude and drag the median income here from the measures. So median rent. So drag the median rent over here to color, and then your second map should fill with the median rent color. Okay, we're going to go back to our columns row up here. And what you're going to do is on the second longitude, click dual axis. And what this will do is it'll layer your two maps on top of each other. So now you should be looking at the same map that I'm looking at here. So it's just a matter of dual axis. It may take a second or two to load depending on the speed of your internet connection, which is why I'm not doing this live right now because my internet's not fast enough to load this quickly. Okay, so once you have the dual axis, then you should have these layered on top of each other. And once you have them on top of each other, then we're going to go ahead and make a few changes. So the first change that we're going to make is that what we're seeing here is the darker areas have more people who have public assistance. But that's actually an indication of a poorer neighborhood. We want to know about the richer neighborhoods. So we actually want to flip this scale. Because what we're going to be looking for is an area that's dark in terms of rent and light in terms of people receiving a public assistance. So we can find areas that are dark with public assistance, that are light with public assistance and light with rent to indicate areas that are cheaper or more affordable housing is available to people who are potentially on public assistance. Okay, that is a long and complicated way to say. Come over here to Edit Colors and select Reversed. I'm not a big fan of the blue teal, so I'm going to go with this red. It's easier to see the gradients because of the ways your eyes work. So make sure that you hit Flipped here and then Apply and then OK. And then come down here to your median rent, hit Color, go to Edit Colors, and change it to this gray, because what that does is it, rather than adding more colors, it just increases the saturation. Okay, so go ahead and click OK. And what we see here are a couple of neighborhoods that are particularly light. If yours is looking still really, really bright red, go back up to here and adjust your opacity. You don't want it more than about 50%. And 40% is working pretty well for me. Okay, so we see these neighborhoods that are really interesting that we would probably want to look into deeper because they not only have the cheapest rent, but they also have the most people receiving public assistance. So we'll probably look into those. Okay, we are going to move on to another map because you might be saying to yourself, well, okay, but really, that's really hard to see. So if you are saying that to yourself, go ahead and either duplicate that map, or if you want to change your color schema, come over and select the longitude and the longitude and copy your longitude, and then you'll get these two maps here. And then again, on the top longitude card, pull in median rent, and on the bottom longitude card, the count of people receiving public assistance. And then you have maps that you can compare more easily. Typically, I think this is a much better way to display this information. Unfortunately, you can only do 2 maps at a time, so you can't do 4. Also, your maps get way too small if you try to do 4. So if you want to compare 2 things next to each other, I highly encourage you to use these small multiples rather than trying to get it all into one map. Now, there's one more thing that's going on here, and it's up here in the longitude. Nope, it's actually in the last rent map, in the pink rent map. Okay, so your tooltips probably don't have the median rent being displayed in them. The way that you get that is you pull median rent over to your tooltip, and then you change the calculation of it. So median rent doesn't have to exist on every level to be used in the tooltip. You can actually pull any variable you want over into the tooltips in order to get it to display automatically. Okay, we are going to move on to one more map. Now you might be saying to yourself, well, that's not all that helpful because, like, you know, I care more about income than I care about the number of people who are receiving public assistance. Well, you can combine the first strategy that we used, the median income, and add the rent data in the exact same way that we've been doing. So you double click on zip code, drag the median rent to color, and then add your map and add some map layers and the household income at the zip code level. And again, I encourage you to use the gray layer here in order to make this work. When you drag it over, you can only do one at a time. So again, duplicate your longitude by command dragging it over, select dual axis, and that'll get you this one layered map here. We'd probably want to go here and change our color and make sure to reverse it. And then we can see the areas that stand out a little bit better. We probably want to change the opacity to something around 40–50%. All right, like I said, these maps never turn out that amazing. The layered feature I don't think works that well, but it's what Tableau allows you to do. Okay, so you might be saying to yourself, as I would be saying to myself right now, this is actually not that clear. There has to be a better way to display geographic information. And I'll say that there is, and it's generally in a chart. So typically, when you're wanting to display spatial information like rent or income based on a census tract or a neighborhood tabulation area, I think that maps work the best when they're combined with other visualizations. So you can always do a line chart that's simply, median rent over a period of time. Here we just have the month down at the bottom. We have the median rent in the rows. Really, really straightforward, right? Like we see median rent for New York City. Here it is broken out by the number of bedrooms. So all we did was drag bedrooms to the color, and this gives us the median rent by year for the number of bedrooms. It looks like studios have stayed about the same, whereas according to this, both 1 and 2 bedrooms have dropped. What's actually going on here is a data collection issue with Zillow and the types of properties they were recording back then. Another one is what I think actually displays this information a little bit better is the bubbles cost visualization. And this is simply a bubble chart, which I think a lot of you have figured out how to make. But the way that we did it here was it is broken down by color by number of bedrooms. So we have the number of bedrooms variable. We have the median rent variable, and that is the size. We also have it broken down by county name, which there's a filter here for county name to pick the 5 New York counties, and then the rows are just the county name. Overall, I think this probably communicates it better, but if you just display a map like this, then it's actually not that informative. So you need to have some sort of contextualized map to go with it. That said, another thing that you can do is combine even more variables. So here we have both an X and a Y axis. So we have the county name along the X axis in the columns. We have the bedrooms on the Y axis in the rows. We have color indicated by median rent, where the greater the rent, the darker the color, and the number of bedrooms indicated by the sum of the number of bedrooms. So what this is telling us is the number of bedrooms available in this data set, and the Zillow data set collects bedrooms that are listed. So it looks like the most bedrooms are listed in Kings County, Brooklyn, and New York County, or Manhattan. So these have the most active listings. Kings County, Brooklyn, also has slightly larger apartments, but not quite as large as the Bronx, which has, 1.205, whereas this is just below 1.2. The smallest bedrooms listed is in Richmond County, which might seem counterintuitive, but then if you think about what this data set is, it's only listings of available bedrooms. So you would expect that Richmond County would have the fewest, or rather, maybe there's a lot of studios and just not a lot of 2 bedrooms because people are renting houses. All right, so any one of these visualizations on their own is not necessarily the most informative, but combining a map just to contextualize your visualization and then actually displaying the numbers in the visualizations around it is, in my opinion, far more effective in Tableau, because maps in Tableau are subject to a lot of constraints that we'll talk about in the class, but ultimately they can't represent the data quite as faithfully as you might want them to. Okay, so we're going to take a short break and come back. When we come back, we're going to look at how you load neighborhood tabulation areas. There's no easy crosswalk between zip codes and neighborhoods in New York City. So typically, if you have data at the neighborhood level, you want to make sure that all of your data is at the neighborhood level. If you have data at the zip code level, you want to make sure that all of your data is at the zip code level. So I'll show you how to load in a spatial file next. All right, so here we are in a brand new instance of Tableau. And let's say that you got some data that actually came down as a spatial file. Maybe you got it from NHGIS, so you got it from the census. But whatever you've gotten, it came down as a spatial file, as a shape file. So you'd click here on spatial file, and the way that spatial files always work is there will usually be between 4 and 6 files in a folder together. These files have to stay together because the way that shape files work is that this one has instructions to go out and read the others. And it says, I don't know what I'm doing. Let me go find my instructions. And then it goes out and reads the instructions. So you'll see that the only ones that you can actually click on is this one, but the other ones must be there in the exact same location. Okay, so I'm going to click open, and quite easily it all came in. All of the data came in. This shape area, shape length is what Tableau is going to read in order to draw the polygons. And unfortunately, the problem is that there's no zip code here. There's no other information that you can use to join other than this NTA code. And for some reason, the data file that was the crosswalk between other shape files and NTA codes, I can no longer find on the NYC Open Data website. So we're just going to work with what we have. All right, so go over to sheet 1 here. And here you'll notice that the only thing that is in the dimensions as a geographic is this county FIPS, not helpful. But if you come down here, for the first time we're seeing geometry in the measures. And this geometry is generated by Tableau. It's how it read the shape file. If you double click on this, it automatically auto-populates for you. And here, if you have data at the neighborhood tabulation area, you can join it here in the same way that we join all of our other data. You can do the same things. You can come up here and do the command and drag and get your 2 maps, change them to the dual axis to get your 1 map, or completely remove that altogether. You can add the NTA name over here by dragging the NTA name actually to color. If you drag the NTA name to the tooltip, for various reasons, it gives you an asterisk. Tableau thinks that there's more than one possibility for the tooltip name if you only have the tooltip and not, and you don't have the tooltip on anything else. So you can just specify that you want everything to be the same color. It's kind of the hack to get around that tooltip constraint. Okay, so the NTAs functions the exact same way, and you can get NTA data from NYC Open Data. Unfortunately, you can't get it from median income. So at the very outset of your project, you really have to decide if you're going to be working with neighborhood tabulation areas or zip codes, and if the data is available at that aggregation level. If it's not, you'll have to do some sort of calculation or tabulation in a program like QGIS, something that does that is a geographic information system type of program, not Tableau. Okay, we're going to look at one more thing. We're going to go back to the zip codes dashboard in order to look at it. All right, so I have come back here to my rent map. And I'm going to show you something that you should never, ever, ever do. The argument is that it's virtually impossible to understand. Okay, so I have my 2 maps layered on top of each other, but they're really hard to see. I might think to myself, well, it doesn't really make sense to have 2 things with the same visualization strategy, so how about I just use size to indicate something else? I'm going to show you what that looks like. So I'm going to take this count of people on public assistance. I'm going to change it from color to size. And I'm going to change my type here to circle. And then just to clean it up a little bit, I'm going to first add my zip codes back here. I'm going to edit my colors here. I'm going to make this my red. I'm going to apply, click OK. Great, I have my colors, but my dots are underneath. So I'm going to move my longitude over in order to get my dots on top. Go back to my dots. They're not really visible. I'll change my color to make them more opaque and a darker color. Okay, great. So now I have the count of people receiving public assistance layered on top of the median rent. Great. I was able to illustrate both of my variables on the same map. I'm going to argue that this is borderline impossible to understand. Because a map is already utilizing shape and area, utilizing shape and area on top of the map is really, really hard, especially when you've already added a choropleth map, this shaded map underneath. Because unless I hover, I'm not really sure what the boundaries are for each polygon, and where this dot is in relation to this polygon, how that relates to the people who are there. You see, there's all kinds of conceptual things that will get you very confused in terms of this. So ultimately, whenever you're making a map, resist the temptation to layer a visualization on top of your map, unless that visualization is color. We'll look at some examples of bar charts on top and why breaking this rule works in some cases. But for the most part, unless you have a very compelling reason, do not add a visualization on top of your visualization. It's too hard for people to understand. Okay, we're not going to go through creating a dashboard because I believe at this point you know pretty well how to create a dashboard, tighten up your tooltips, and do those kinds of things. All right, I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out, and I will see you at the next one. All right, bye-bye.